everyone. My name is Dave Thomas, and this is the Strategy of Everything. Thank you for joining us for this episode called The Strategy of Sports Broadcasting. My guest for this one is the one and only Dan O'Toole from Jay and Dan fame, both TSN and Fox Sports in the U.S. Dan and I worked together at Sportscentre for a number of years, so if you're into sports or sports TV or sports broadcasting and you're interested in hearing about what goes on behind the scenes, we tell some very specific stories. We talk about some of the things we screwed up over the years. We talk about how Jay and Dan were able to build such a great audience, how to translate that into a full-on career. So Dan and I talk a little bit about his journey, a little bit about how to create that audience. There's really great insight from Dan. So as usual, please look for the companion episode where I'll break down the conversation with Dan using the Strategy of Everything tools, and we will pull out some insights that you can then use for your business, your project, whatever it is, some great learnings from Dan. So that being said, on with the interview. This is Dan O'Toole. It's TSN Television's own Dan O'Toole. How are you?
I'm great, except you said the three letters I don't like to say.
Yeah.
Okay. Fox graduate.
It's Fox alumni, TV's own Dan O'Toole.
The guy who was once on a show with Andy Roddick, Carissa Thompson, Donovan McNabb, Gabe Kapler, and Ephraim Salam, and Jay Onrait.
And Jay.
Now, if you're thinking, did that show work? And if you're thinking, hell no, it didn't, you're correct. There's too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah, there was a few names. Well, thanks for talking and catching up. It's been a while since we have talked, but yeah.
Well, should we give the backstory? We used to work at the network that remains nameless, and you were one of the joys of coming to work with, because we had the same sensibility. Like, this place makes no sense, and we both gave as many craps as each other, which was zero.
Yeah, no, that's pretty accurate. I was actually, I remember when you started, when you
2002.
It was 2002. I was 20, barely. And because I got that job right out of college. Like, I started college, my first semester, I got my internship at TSN, and then I ended up just not going really to school and just working. But when you first started there, how did you get there? And then what were you kind of thinking when you walked through the door? Because it's kind of like, it's not like this Jay and Dan thing just came and it was like, a thing from day one. But when you walk in the door, because we were working weekend nights at 2 a.m., right? Like, how'd you get there, and what was kind of your first thoughts?
My first thought was, I've made it. This is what I always wanted to do, and here I am. They found me because I had worked in Fort McMurray doing play-by-play. I started putting a little tape together, working at a cable station there, sent it to Vancouver, and the news director at the station said, get 1 year's experience, we'll hire you. He called me in 1 year. He said, did you get the experience? Didn't ask to see it. And I'm like, yep. Hired me. Within 9 months of doing sports at City TV, I helped launch it. I got a phone call from a gentleman by the name of Mark Milliere. And he left a message. He said, Dan, this is Mark Milliere from TSN. If this is on speakerphone, please take it off. I'd like to talk to you about a potential job opportunity. I thought I was being punked, but I wasn't. So I called them back and I turned the job down. I was living in Vancouver at a brand new station. How cool was I? I was rollerblading to work every day, and I was dating Miss Molson India. I'm like, life can't get better than this. So I said, thanks, but no thanks. He called me back again. He says, hey, you really want to maybe do this? And I said, no, I'm good. And then he got James Duthie, who had left Vancouver to go to Toronto, to call me and said, Dan, I know, I get it. Like, Vancouver's awesome. It's beautiful weather. It's a beautiful city. But this opportunity might not come around again. So I'm like, nah, I'm good. And then he got Blake Price to call, who had just recently done the move from Vancouver to Toronto. He's like, dude, just do it. I'm like, okay. So they browbeat me, and I made the move, and that's how I ended up there. My first broadcast partner, you mentioned weekends, was Sunil Joshi. Yes, I went through Sunil Joshi, and then I had Lisa Hillary. I had Holly Horton. So I did weekends, and I thought that was the rest of my life, doing weekends and fill-in reporting on Leafs games. And then the lockout hit. Blake Price moved back to Vancouver. The guy who called me to tell me to go to Toronto moved back to Vancouver, which opened up a role. And then I got paired with Jay during the NHL lockout. And the rest is history.
So you get paired with Jay. One of the things that I like to look at and talk about is like this unfair advantage that people have either independently or as a team. And so you and Jay had something, and people often describe it as like, oh, we had something special. We know with this it factor, whatever it is. But how long before you realized, oh shit, this is different than like hanging out with the other hosts? Like
it wasn't as quick as people might find, because we were learning how to work with one another, and Jay gave me a piece of advice probably a month into working together. He said a funny line, and then, as anchors tend to do, I tried to add something just before the commercial break. So we go to commercial break, and he's like, and I know him now, and it probably was very difficult for him to say, but he's like, this needs to be said. He's like, if you want to say something and it's not funny, just don't say anything at all. And I'm like, brilliant. So that's what I tell young broadcasters now. I'm like, be comfortable with that uncomfortable silence and let the joke land. 99% of the time, not saying anything is the right thing to do. So as soon as we got that was a monumental shift in how we worked with one another. And then we started to bond over things like Tim and Eric, awesome show, great job, which is our favorite sketch duo. So we would watch clips of that, and then we bonded over that. But I look back on those early days of our shows, and it makes me cringe because I was terrible. I was not a good broadcaster. I was the worst actor in all of our bits. My best version of us, that when I think of our show, is after we had done that first go round on TSN, then went to Fox. So we got more to draw off of, more experience. And then we landed back in Toronto with our name branded on the show. That 4-year stretch was our best shows, hands down. We never laughed so hard. We never cared less. And that's what made the show amazing, because at least once a week, Jay would make me laugh so hard that I couldn't speak, or I would make Jay laugh so hard that he couldn't speak. And I'm like, that right there was the lead up. Everything that we had done before was the lead up to the perfect incarnation of our show. And then I got fired.
Those early days when it started with you guys late at night. And
Yes.
what I think
that show was live at 2 a.m. because we were doing the Civic.
People don't realize, like, we were there till 3 a.m. every Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right? So it felt more like cable access, in a sense that it almost felt like nobody was really watching because it's so late for us. So there was all this shenanigans, right? And I think one of the things that connected you guys, your first audience really was the newsroom. And so the guys on the row, which is what we call, where, people watch TSN, you see all the guys running around in the background, writing scripts, handing stuff off. That's what I was doing. But that's what there was the row. And that is a very specific culture, right? Mm-hmm. And so your first audience was those guys. And when we started to notice, it was like, you can tell they're making jokes just to make us laugh. Like, they're screwing around. They just said something that's a complete inside joke. 5 people in the world are going to get this, and we're all sitting right here, right? And so when that started to broaden, like, what do you think made that connect with the broader audience so well in that early stage? Because it started to get that momentum.
Yeah.
So what do you think it was? Like, how do you guys think that, like, that connection with the audience made such a difference?
So it's a few things, and I'm glad you touched upon that, because Jay and I, we established early on we wanted to do a show that we would watch. And if you're hanging out with buddies, watching a highlight show, if you're watching anything, if you're just hanging out with buddies, it's all about inside jokes, and it's stuff that makes you laugh. It's not to a broad audience. So when we started doing that, it almost created a kind of secret society in which we were pulling back the curtain, and like, most people won't get it. Kind of going back to Tim and Eric. 99% of people that watch Tim and Eric will be like, this is insane. This makes no sense. But the people that get it really get it, and they love it. So that's what we did the show as. We did it as our own little playhouse to make each other laugh, to make you guys laugh, and to pull back the curtain. And if people were in on the gag, then they had a blast. Other people, the most common response was, these guys try too hard. And my response to them always was, no, you don't get it. We actually aren't trying. Like, we specifically go out of our way not to do work and just screw around. That's what made it work, was the secret society kind of feel to it, where people are like, oh yeah, I got it. And there'd be ongoing gags, like pointing Limey out, a guy who wore a lime sweater once in the newsroom and for the rest of his life was known as Limey. Just stupid stuff like that. How we incorporated producer Tim, who was our disgruntled producer. He was an ongoing bit in the show because it made us laugh. And if you got it, then it would make you laugh too. So yeah, that's how it all came about, was the inside baseball kind of feel to it.
Well, and Tim's a great example, because at first people were like, thought it was made up, that there was no Tim. And if you know Tim, it's hilarious that he became like a TV character.
He is the grumpiest human on earth.
Yeah,
I still work with him to this day, and I don't know why. So I went to my current company, which is Bet Rivers, and they're like, well, we need producers. And I'm like, well, Tim got laid off at the same time as me, and he was always the voice of reason in the room, the only person in broadcasting I ever got into quarrels with, just him and I. And because we butted heads so bad, but he would always say, guys, maybe we crossed the line and we should redo that. And we'd be like, oh, Tim, you're at no fun. And then we driving home, we're like, I'm so glad we redid that. We've offended a lot of people. So I brought him along because he was the voice of reason and he wasn't a yes man, which made it work. He was our filter to the rest of the world. So he's probably saved us a lot of times, even though we really disliked him telling us no. But he was like the fatherly figure that we knew kept the guardrails on things.
Well, and in those like really early days too, because I remember there would be days when the show would go on and then it would be like, well, we'll see how long it takes for the phone calls to come, right? And so we would always wait to be like, did they call? Did they? So how did you know in those moments, and maybe the answer is Tim, but how did you know in those moments, like, what are the rules that we can bend? What are the rules we can break? What are the ones we know we can't touch? Because there was a lot of like envelope pushing. It was testing. You guys were testing this thing out on national television, which then like opened so many doors. But how did you guys know, like, okay, this is the line, these are the ones we can't kind of break?
Well, I found out where the line was when I crossed it one night unknowingly. I've never told this story. So we were in the last commercial break. We come back, we do the highlight, and the night show's over. So we're having a discussion. We always have live mics, so we're wary of what we say. And we're having a discussion about someone. And I said, that person is a grade A. And I wrote on the back of a piece of paper, the worst C word, see you next Tuesday. So I wrote it on the piece of paper and I said, that person's a grade A, and I held it up. So we're finishing the show. When I picked up my papers at the end of the show on TV, the capitalized C word was right there as I'm stacking my papers.
As you're cleaning up your desk.
So I went straight from that show to the airport. I was going to Talladega because I did work for NASCAR Canada. And I got a call in the airport, and it was HR. And they're like, Dan, we saw what you show. They told me, we think you did it deliberately. I'm like, well, that makes no sense. Why would I just show that word? I told the entire situation of how it happened. I'm like, it was an honest mistake. Like, I didn't mean to do that. And they're like, well, we think you did it on purpose. I'm like, well, I didn't. So I got suspended for like 4 days, which was the length of my trip to Talladega. So that was a line I crossed. Don't write that word and show it on national TV. But other stuff, like, I can't think of anything else, but there were at least a handful, if not a dozen incidents where so you do the live show, and then it goes out to play on the loop in the morning, but you have the ability to fix any errors.
Right.
So there was at least 12 maybe even like 20 incidents where we're like, yeah, we should probably clean that up a little. There was never any swearing, nothing that crossed a line like that, but maybe making fun of a fan in the stands. We're like, well, maybe there's something going on with that fan. So we better err on the side of caution and just take that out. So simple stuff like that, where you don't want to offend anyone. Like, we aren't calling them names, but maybe there's something going on mentally with that person and you don't want to draw attention to them.
There was one, because so one of my jobs when I was there was like, we'd write the scripts with the highlights, cut the highlights together. And sometimes we would run in and you guys were live and we're like off camera, like handing you the script because it's all happening kind of in the moment. There was one time, and the EA will remain nameless, who wrote the script. But do you remember the Batista comment? So he
Remind
wrote
me.
what he intended to say was it was his second home run off of Batista that year. And instead of home run, he used the word jack.
Jack off.
And you went, that's his second. And by the time you could hear you get it halfway through, and you were like, that was his second jack, and there's nowhere to go after you saved him. Off Batista and we died. Like, he never lived. We died. It was.
I love that.
It was one of the best.
I know when we would make corrections, because I remember Mark Teixeira. First time I saw his name in a highlight pack, I said Mark Teixeira. So we're like, oh, that was wrong. So we needed to correct that. So we'd have to correct things like that. I wanted to ask you a question, Dave Thomas.
Yep.
So when you went into the newsroom, and I never asked this of anyone that was on the row, you probably felt the same way as I did. I've made it. I'm working at Canada's Sports Leader. At what point, how long into your time on the row do you look at the ladder to get where you wanted to go, and then realize at the top of the ladder, oh, those people have been in that job for 30 years. I'm never getting that job. So I'm kind of stuck here in purgatory. When did that dawn upon you, or did that even happen?
It did, 100%. Because so I started in the newsroom. Again, like you said, I was 19, I think, when I started. Like, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened. I'm never going anywhere.
You're telling everyone you know?
With my friends for life.
Yeah.
That quickly goes away when you realize that you're watching 5 hockey games and editing 5 packs, and it's live television.
And you're never leaving that room. You don't go to the games.
Yeah, you don't actually do anything cool. There's literally no benefits whatsoever. I realized that when I kind of looked up and I saw, there's producers who've been here for 15 years. They introduced like a more middle management role in between those, and the row, all the guys on the row were like fighting to get that like highlight manager role, right? I'm going to oversee all this stuff. And when you found out they were fighting for that, and it was like $50K, and you're like, what am I doing with my life? Like that, all fighting for this one role. And so that's when I moved over to .ca. So I left the row and went over to tsn.ca. And at the time, my thought was digital is more broad. I'll be able to apply digital somewhere else because I'm stuck in this newsroom. Where can I go?
Exactly. There's 2 options.
And so I was like, digital, I can expand that out somewhere. I can it'll get me more reach. So I went over there, did the digital thing. And that's where I loved, it had its pros and cons too, but we were kind of in the Wild West at that point. Like, digital was nothing there. We did the first, web only content when we started doing the fantasy hockey update with Scott. And so it was like we were creating content only for the internet. And everyone's like, what are you guys doing? Like, why are you wasting? We did like the very first live event broadcast in Canada. And if I tell you we were patching like things in like with bubble gum, like and we were like,
what was the live event?
It was a CFL game. And so we were starting to like just play with stuff, right? And that's when we were like, Jay, Dan, like we should do a podcast. At that point, there were no podcasts. There was nothing. It was like a blank canvas. And we had this kind of like similar, a spot of like understanding what was going on in culture. Like, this is gonna be amazing, right? Do you remember this? So we went, and it was like you, me, and Jay, and we talked about it. We were like, hey, let's do it. We went on the set. We just
sat at the desk and talked.
15 minutes. We're like, that's enough. That's a demo. this is going to be amazing. It was like you guys shooting the shit. It was kind of like, okay, we're going to be able to like let the barn doors open here, right? And we were just like, I remember we were so excited, and you guys were like, hey, we're going to go take this to like the powers that be. Do you remember the feedback that we got on the very
100%? We sent it to our bosses and they said, this needs to be 5 minutes. And we're like, we only did 15. And we're like, but people don't even pulled out of your driveway in 5 minutes. We're like, that makes no sense. And that was one of the countless times where I thought to myself, these people are in charge of us. They have no clue what they're doing. And did that dawn upon you when you're looking at where you need to advance to and the people that held those positions? And did you see how they interacted with other humans? And you're like, wait, so if I advance, do I have to become a complete asshole?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was the moment when I realized we are so far away from being able to like break through what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
Right. Like, this idea of this podcast was too long at 15 minutes. Like, we just recorded like snippet. Like we were, there was nothing. And then the other piece of feedback where I was like, okay, they don't get it, was nobody wants to hear these guys talk about.
And we never talked about sports when we actually started doing that. So that was 2009. As we look back on tweets.
And so we like backed off. We literally were just like, that crushed everything. I ended up going up to Discovery Channel because I was like, see ya, this is going to be more transferable again. And I remember it was like maybe 4 months later or something, and you text me a link and it was Tim and Sid's podcast.
Oh.
And we were like, and Tim and Sid took off.
Yeah.
That blew up. I ended up like leaving. That's when I left and went into advertising. Another couple months later, I got another text with a link, and it was Jay and Dan's podcast brought to you by Home Depot.
Yeah, no, it would have been Mark's Work Warehouse.
Mark's Work Warehouse. See, but it was like, it was good. I was happy to see that it like happened, but it was just one of those things where it was like, we had it right there.
We had it, yes.
And we couldn't get the other people involved to buy into like.
And the weird thing is, for them to just give it the green light would have cost them $0. There was no investment needed. We had the microphones, we had recording equipment. They just had to send it out.
Which is that's what we were doing on the digital team. We were just making stuff and putting it out anyway. But
my will to live was almost shattered when, for some reason, they were negotiating one of the sponsorship deals, and they sent me a link. So I was listening in on this, like there was dollar figures being bandied about on what TSN was making off the sponsorship deal. And I think it was with Marks, might have been with someone else, but the deal was $1 million because they were getting naming for the podcast. They were getting like segment naming on the show. And it was $1 million. And Jay and I each saw $1,000 from it. And I'm like, what is happening here? That's where I was like, wait a minute. We're providing all the content and we're getting $1,000. So yeah, I don't think I was supposed to be on that call.
Yeah, no,
someone messed up.
No, probably not. But that's what that's what really opened the door, though. I think the podcast kicking off really like made people realize, like the audience realize, get more of what they wanted, and then the executive.
Well, it was a perfect accompaniment for the show. It was almost like if you remember, Mr. Show was a great sketch show. David Cross and Bob Odenkirk, and they put out a book where it like explained every episode. I'm like, the podcast was almost like following along with the show. It was like almost the after show for the show. And they got us, listeners and viewers got to know us better. And it got us a new audience. And we had a lot of iconic guests and iconic moments that got carried over into the show. So it was the perfect accompaniment. Say that word.
Accompaniment.
Which sounds like we're both saying it really wrong, but it was the perfect addition to the Jay and Dan brand, and it was a blast. It was my favorite thing to do there because we just shot the shit for an hour.
And so then that opened up LA, right? Like Fox here's something. How does like that all happen? How does
I can tell you exactly. So the Wall Street Journal wrote an article titled "Why Isn't American Sportscenter like Canadian Sportscenter?" And it was all about Jay and I. And that landed on the desk of a gentleman by the name of Jacob Ullman at Fox. And he called us. We were at the London Olympics for TSN, so that would have been 2012. And he called. He's like, "Hey, we'd love for you guys to be a part of the launch of our new sports network, FS1." And we're like, "Okay." And then a month later, he's like, "Yeah, it's not going to work out." So we're like, "Oh, that lasted a month. We're going in a different direction." And then 3 months later, they're like, "Nope, we want you guys." So we started contract talks, went to one of our bosses, Phil King, who used to be in charge of TSN, sat down. We were like, "We want your honest opinion. What should we do?" And he's like, "Guys, if my son was in your position, I would say, you will never get this offer again. Take it. You can always come back." We're like, "Are you sure?" And he said, "Yes, I'm 1,000%. I am telling you, you need to take it." So we did it and went to Fox because of a Wall Street Journal article. And we're there for the start of FS1. And then we had to deal with the backlash from Canadians, which was, "What a bunch of sellouts." To which I wanted to respond to each of them personally and say, "Okay, so Michael Bublé is a very successful Canadian singer. Is he only allowed to put his songs out in Canada? Bryan Adams, can he only release his songs in Canada? Celine Dion, Justin Bieber?" And also, if you're, say, working at the Cracker Factory and you're making $10 an hour, and then the Cracker Factory in LA comes and says, "We'll give you $500 an hour." What would you say?
You'd make crackers in LA.
Yeah, you're like, we're still making crack. I'm still doing the same thing, and I can do it for $500 an hour. But you'll be a sellout for doing that at the Cracker Factory in LA. So yeah, it was a very easy financial decision to make and lifestyle decision to make, because living in LA for 4 years, man, people say, do you miss the seasons? And when you're there, you're like, fuck no, I don't miss the seasons at all. I don't miss snow. But when you move back to Canada, you're like, I did miss the seasons, because every day blends into one another in LA. Here, you have a sunny day in November that it's 10 degrees. You're like, this is the greatest day of my life. So yeah, it is good being Canadian and living in Canada.
And so I've talked to Jay about this a little bit too, and he said it was like almost immediate when he got there to be like, "Oh shit, this is not." He said it was like the first week, it was like, "Oh boy, what? Well, I guess we'll just ride this out."
So I mentioned all those people that were on the show, a cast of characters, and a 3-hour show every night. Mike Tyson was on our first show, and here's my one snippet. I tell Mike Tyson I had 30 seconds, just him and I, in a commercial break, and I'm like, "Hey Mike, I gotta ask you a question. If you hit me as hard as you could in the head, would you break my neck?" And Mike Tyson looks me in the eyes. He goes, "You're stronger than you think." And I'm like, whoa, is that kind of like a pep talk from Mike Tyson?
Were you motivated from that on?
I was. I'm like, let's go. Drop him, Mike. So, no, even before we did our first show, like they would pitch the show to us and we're like, this is not going to work, but we got a 4-year guaranteed contract. I'm not going to tell them how to do the show. I'm just going to show up and do it. And it dawned on us like a couple months into the show, a 3-hour show with all those people. And I went home, watched it on the PVR, and Jay and I in a 3-hour show were on for 2 minutes. So I'm like, what are we doing here? And then we didn't get to be ourselves, and they wanted us to fit the mold of whatever producer was doing that segment. So it was a debacle, but it was fun to be a part of.
In that moment, you're like, okay, this is not going to be the opportunity we thought it was, from a, awareness, and like people are going to know who we are. We're going to be like national celebrities here, but financially, great deal. You're living in LA, super fun. What do you start to focus on then to be like, how do we turn this outside of like okay, we're making more money than we were. What career-wise, like how do we use this to our advantage? What are we going to do?
Dave, I think you know me well enough by now. My goal in life is to do as little as I possibly can in all jobs. So I didn't focus more on work. I didn't neglect my work. I just focused on the fact that I lived in LA and soaked in every second of that, and went to the beach as much as I could, sat in the sun as much as I could, and showed up at work realizing we're screaming into the void. Here's another thing that dawned on us. We're like, I don't think anyone's seen this show. So they gave us business cards. I wish I still had one. And on the back of our business cards was a listing of what cable subscriber and what channel. So on Verizon, it would be like channel 1033. It'd be channel 987. So the goal was give that business card if you're at a restaurant or a bar, so they would know where to find the channel. And if we didn't have our card, was to request them put Fox Sports 1 on in the bar in hopes that they would forget that it was on there and we would just have the channel left on ours. So it was very guerrilla marketing for a company as big as Fox. And the fact that no one could stumble upon our channel, the fact that no one ever talked about it, the fact that the ratings were usually a dash mark, which is not good. That means no one, like someone may have left their channel on. We'd get like a 0.2.
Some bar actually left.
Yeah, we'd get a 0.2 as a rating. We're like, man, that was a big one. So going up against a behemoth like ESPN, you always want to approach it saying like, we've got a shot. You know, people want a new alternative. Eventually it creeps into your brain. You're like, I don't think they do.
The irony, though, is that while you're down there and from the Canadian perspective is like, Jay and Dan are hitting Hollywood. And you're like, celebrity here grows.
Yes.
So we can't even watch it here, right? Like it's not even on here. So then it goes to shit. You guys come back. And now the old network who forced you to go work there and then told you to leave now says, you guys can basically do whatever you want.
Yeah. They came to us.
Show. Like, what is that like when you come back? What is the approach to that when you're kind of handed the keys after like, that situation you were just in?
It was an interesting negotiating standpoint because we found out like 6 months to go in our contract when Jay and I were doing the 50th version of Fox Sports Live from a closet was no bigger than the room I am in right now. We were literally in a storage closet doing a show. One day the bosses called us in. They're like, yeah, the show's done, but we're going to pay you to the end of your contract. Just don't say anything bad about it. So we're like, sold.
Yeah.
We were the last remaining ones from the original crew, aside from Carissa Thompson, who is still there. Everyone else was gone. So everyone else was on shorter deals. They just knew we're tied to these guys for 4 years. We can't get rid of them. So it was kind of like Office Space. They just kept pushing us and they're still showing up. I guess. Okay. They're still here. Guys, we don't need you anymore. Can you just go away? We'll still pay you. So that started us wondering, well, what's next? So we had agents at the time. I look back now and they got us sit downs with companies. And I think it was just a favor called in by our agent to them to make it look like he was doing something. Nothing ever came to, like we got a Showtime. So we're like, well, maybe we'll get a Showtime show. No, it was all a negotiating ploy. And then TSN entered the mix. They flew down and they had the whole pitch. They said it's going to be Jay and Dan, Sportscentre with Jay and Dan. And they had the whole graphics package. And we're like, so all we had to do was leave the country. And then when we come back, we get our name on the show. That's what you just got to leave. And so that's when we agreed to it. And we came back, got announced on Trade Center. If you look back on the clips, I had spent the previous 3 days in Vegas celebrating. And they're like, you need to be here at 8 a.m. in this studio. So I am extremely hungover in that clip in which we're on Sportscentre. And I wanted I did not want to be in that studio. I wanted to still be in Vegas. I'm like, man, I was on a heater on the craps table. Why am I here?
And so when you said get the keys to the show, you and Jay decide, okay, now what? Like, what's the strategy for that show outside of just make each other laugh.
That was it. And then we were like, as you said, we had the keys. We got some of our ideas shot down. We got to bring writers with us. We had Norm and Brendan, who were writers on our show, who are also Canadian. They came with us. We got that written into the contract. We want writers so we can do bits. So we had never done real produced written bits before. So it was a brand new opportunity to see the show in the vision that we always wanted to do it. Still at that time, we did some bits where I'm like, this isn't working, but I was a good soldier and just went along with it. And then now that the show's completely different and I'm not a part of it, I go back to the guys. I'm like, guys, can we admit now like that bit I didn't want to do was not funny? They're like, yeah, it didn't really work. I'm like, well, why did you guys listen to me then? So yeah, it was interesting. We got to do highlights. We got to get up and walk over to the one section, which, because we're just kids doing TV, Jay and I, just us being able to walk on camera was like a big deal. We're like, this is so cool. We're walking over here now. We make a big production of it. So yeah, it was interesting. We also thought, because it was like Tim Hortons, Sportscentre with Jay and Dan, brought to you by Tim Hortons. We're like, oh, we're going to have Tim Hortons every night. We never got any Tim Hortons. And then McDonald's was a sponsor. We're like, oh, Big Macs every night. We never got any Big Macs. So you think by that point, being in TV for 20, I should have realized, well, if someone's a sponsor of a show, you don't get the sponsor product. But I thought, well, if your name's on it, you must get something.
At least you get $1,000.
Yeah, just imagine what that contract was. What the McDonald's was paying
right now, right? Like I think about that all the time.
Yeah, that's whenever I see that, I'm like, Harvey's is still around. Way to go!
They do make a great burger, though.
They do.
Like the topping.
Here's one thing with Harvey's: never forget a Harvey's takeout bag in your car.
Okay,
that stench will live in your car for years.
This is great advice. This is
because there's always like one little onion or something, and that little onion, it does not want to die.
Ferments.
Yeah, not to rush us, but just to be. I've got a hard out at 2.
Yeah, that's good.
We're good.
Yeah. So now you're doing Point River. What's the deal? How does that all come?
Wait.
River, Bet River. That's it.
Bet Rivers.
Points bet
so
Rivers.
What you just did, Dave Thomas, was something I would do on the show when I wouldn't know a player's name.
Right. I put two things together that make
you say it really quick. That's called the Dave Pratt. So say I already mentioned Mark Teixeira before. It'd be like Mark Teixeira. So you just kind of like slur it so people don't realize if you said it right or wrong. So that's what you did with Bet. You went, you got Bet River.
Yeah, and then I've had combined two of the companies. Like it was like TSN Net is what I did.
But it is Bet Rivers, a company based out of Chicago. They're great. Legalize gambling. Download the app today.
Interesting. Can we talk about the mustache in the commercial?
Yeah, those were. I want to know the price tag on those. So I had 3 different mustaches during our Olympic commercials, which I look back, I'm like, no one even realized there were 3 different mustaches. So we wasted some money there, and we could have just gone with the one. But it was real human hair, and the strength of glue, in order for it not to move on my face. By the end of a 5-day shoot, I looked like it was just raw. It would look like you could almost see through my lip to my teeth.
Okay, because I thought it was your mustache.
No.
At first I was like, Dan, what? That's Dan. Like, what does that mustache come from? And it looks like a costume. So I'm glad to hear it wasn't.
Yeah. And there's one clip, if you analyze the commercials, which a lot of friends did, I'm beside a pool in really short shorts, and I'm like doing like shadow boxing, and I kick, and they put that in there. I injured myself after that. I thought I was like looking really cool. I'm like over there in between shoots, and they were filming it. And then I went over and looked at the monitor. I'm like, I look like an old man. And they're like, oh yeah, it's great. It's going in the commercial. So I want to get your take on this. And I have this discussion with a lot of people. So those Bet Rivers commercials aired a lot during the Olympics.
They did.
I don't understand people that when they see a commercial a lot get filled with anger. Because I'm of the mindset, I've seen the Ozempic commercials, I don't know, 1,000 times. Never once did I be like, oh, God, that Ozempic. I talk to humans in the room.
You get hate online for
Oh,
those
people are like,
commercials?
enough already.
And mustache kicking.
Yeah, they're like, enough already. I'd like to see some Olympics. Didn't know I tuned in for Bet Rivers commercials and might see some Olympic. I'm like, if you are focusing on commercials this much, you need to go outside.
That's fair.
You need to go into the kitchen, get a bowl of cereal.
I'll tell you the one commercial that does make me angry, though.
Uh-oh.
Well, one brand commercials that makes me very angry. It's Skip the Dishes.
Okay.
With them. Because of the fucking doorbell at the end. There's a doorbell and my dogs go crazy every time.
I knew it.
And I'm just like, guys, what are we doing here? The TV's on. I got the game on. I'm cooking dinner. Ding dong. Dogs go nuts every time. Can't do it.
I know a commercial that I just saw the other night that was on a lot during the Leafs game, and it was for men's underwear that like is like a diaper.
Homemade videos that those guys make. Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, people are going to get upset about this one.
That one for sure.
I thought it was a skit at first.
Yeah.
They're like, now that we're alone, can we talk about these underwear I'm wearing?
What strikes me is like it's very clearly like made by like just a couple guys by themselves, and I'm like, where did they get the money to pay for the media to get it on TV?
Yeah. The other one my friend openly got mad about was the Taylor Swift Rogers commercials. And he's like, if I see another one of those commercials, I'm like,
I am not going to listen to Taylor Swift ever again.
And he's one of these people that also gets mad at them showing Taylor Swift during a football game. I'm like, what happened to you?
What are you? Who hurt you?
Yes. I'm like, they show her for under a minute during a game. Like, are you mad at any fan? Why do they have to show her? I'm like, because she's the most popular female, maybe male or female, in the world?
And she's at a football game?
She's a successful, happy woman, and you're mad? Why are they showing her?
People get irrationally angry about things, especially like commercials, and just don't watch it. Just do something else during the commercials.
You know what, Dave? While doing this, I think we need to do a podcast together. This has been a great conversation.
I'll do it.
You're very good at this.
I've tried. I went to school for approximately 6 months of broadcasting school. So
You're very natural.
I did the feedback I got from because we would do like a fake newscast like every week, right? And everyone would rotate through the things, and I was very bad at it because I never really took it seriously. And I remember the feedback. You'd sit back with the professor, and the feedback, she was like, I just can't take you seriously when you're reading the news. I feel like you're just doing the weekend update. And I was like, it's amazing. Thank you.
I couldn't get news from you, but I'd listen to a podcast hosted by you.
Let's do it. I'm in.
Okay. Well, I am talking to my boss here in 2 minutes. I'll say, hey, although we've gotten to the point now, I've hand delivered people that have an audience. And I'm like, you guys could get them here. They bring an instant audience. And they're like, nah, we're going to get Pierre Maguire. I'm like, no one wants to hear Pierre Maguire.
People,
don't put that out there. People love Pierre Maguire. Cut that.
We'll delete that part. But I'm always down to talk with you. It's fun. This is awesome. Thanks for taking some time out of your busy.
No, there wasn't busy at all. I'm just. I wanted to tape the podcast this afternoon. Tim's like, no, we can only tape at 9 a.m. I'm like, I don't want to talk for an hour at 9 a.m. I don't want to do that. So that's not happening.
Doesn't sound like Tim would want to be up at 9 a.m. either, but.
No, Tim, if I said, let's do it at 9 a.m., he'd be like, no, we need to do it at 2.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I got to go because it is actually a boss meeting at 2.
All right. Well, you tell your boss I said what's up. And
okay.
Thanks again for doing this, buddy. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, buddy. Send me clips.
Well, that's it. A great conversation with my friend Dan O'Toole. Hopefully you enjoyed it, found it entertaining. Hopefully you learned a few things. If you'd like to learn more about the strategy of sports broadcasting and all the things we talked about, you can find the companion episode in the description. There's a link, or you just find us on LinkedIn. At They Call Me DT is where you can connect with me there. And check out strategyofeverything.com. Like everybody else, please feel free to subscribe, give it a rating, share it with a friend. All of those awesome things that help spread the word about what we are up to. So until next time, I'm Dave Thomas, and this is The Strategy of Everything.